Everyone talks about how hard it is to build wealth, how hard it is to get fit, how hard it is to build a company, write a book, or master a skill. The self-help industry has built a trillion-dollar cathedral on this premise, that the path to success is steep, brutal, and strewn with obstacles only the specially gifted can navigate. They are wrong, and that error is costing you everything. Getting rich is not that hard. Getting in shape is not that hard. Building something meaningful is not that hard. What is genuinely, structurally, neurologically difficult, what requires a kind of discipline that borders on the superhuman, is staying poor, staying unfit, staying stuck. These states are not passive. They are active. They demand constant energy to maintain. The real achievement of the average, struggling person is not their failure to rise. It is the extraordinary, punishing effort they expend every single day simply to remain where they are. If you could redirect even a fraction of that energy, you would already be winning. The question is not how to work harder. The question is how to stop fighting gravity in the wrong direction. Here is the central illusion the modern world sells you: that success is a sprint. That somewhere out there is a button, a hack, a course, a secret, a contact that will compress 5 years of compound growth into a single weekend. The internet did not create this fantasy, but it industrialized it. Every algorithm, every scroll, every notification is calibrated to make you feel that everyone else has already found the button, that you are the only one still walking while the world is teleporting. This feeling is not accidental. It is manufactured, and it is the most effective poverty trap ever engineered. Think about what a rocket must do to leave Earth. It does not simply need to move upward. It needs to achieve escape velocity, approximately 11.2 kilometers per second. Below that threshold, gravity wins. Every time. You can have the most beautifully designed spacecraft in history, the most sophisticated fuel mixture, the most brilliant engineering team on the planet. If you do not hit escape velocity, you come back down. The atmosphere does not care about your intentions. Physics does not negotiate. Your financial and cognitive position in the world operates by identical logic. There is a threshold below which every linear effort, work a little harder, save a little more, hustle a little longer, gets captured by the gravitational field of your current circumstances and pulled back down. The forces pulling you back are not metaphorical. They are structural. They are embedded in interest rates, in pricing systems, in the way exhaustion degrades decision-making, in the invisible tax that scarcity levies on your mind at every moment of every day. The self-help world told you to just push harder, to grind, to hustle. It never told you about escape velocity, because escape velocity is not a product you can sell in a weekend seminar. You cannot buy a course on orbital mechanics. You have to understand the physics of your own life, and then engineer a trajectory that actually leaves the gravitational field, rather than one that simply climbs higher before falling back down. Linear effort against a nonlinear force is a losing equation. A person who earns $30,000 a year and saves $1,500, a perfectly respectable 5% savings rate, is not building toward escape velocity. They are performing motion while the system performs gravity. The math does not lie. The math never lies. And the math says that without a fundamental change in the rate of change, not just the absolute numbers, but the trajectory itself, the escape never comes. This is not pessimism, it is physics. And physics, unlike motivation, is something you can work with. There is a concept in economics that the writer Terry Pratchett articulated through a character named Sam Vimes, and it cuts to the bone of what economic disadvantage actually means at the granular level. Vimes, who grew up poor, understood something that wealthy people never have to learn. The poor pay more. Not in relative terms, in absolute, per-unit terms. They pay more for the same boots, more for the same food, more for the same money they borrow, more for the same shelter they rent, more for the same time they spend. Consider what it actually costs to be at the bottom of the economic system. When you have no capital reserves, you cannot buy in bulk, so you pay the per-unit premium every single day. A family that cannot afford a $200 rice cooker buys a $15 model that breaks in 8 months. Over 5 years, they spend more on broken appliances than the family that bought once and forgot about it. This is not a quirk or an exception. This is the architecture of poverty. Being broke is the most expensive possible way to live. The same principle applies to time. When you are in survival mode, working 2 jobs, managing constant financial anxiety, navigating bureaucratic systems designed for people with lawyers, you cannot plan. You can only react. Every dollar that comes in is already committed before it arrives. Every decision is made under duress. And decisions made under duress are expensive decisions. The car you bought because you needed something immediately cost $4,000 more than the car you would have bought if you had 3 weeks and a credit score that did not look like a crime scene. This is the entry fee of the lower system. It is not a bug. It is a feature. Not of some malicious conspiracy, but of a market that is perfectly optimized for people who already have resources. The market does not hate you. It simply does not see you. It was designed by and for people who could pay upfront, wait for deals, and absorb risk without catastrophe. Everyone else pays the surcharge. Every day, every transaction, every time. And the cruelest part of this mechanism is that it consumes not just money, but cognitive capacity, the very resource you would need to engineer your escape. You cannot solve your way out of a poverty trap while the poverty trap is actively degrading your ability to solve problems. This is not an excuse. This is neuroscience. And ignoring it is not strength. It is stupidity. Here is what the research on scarcity actually shows, and it should stop you cold. When people are in conditions of genuine resource scarcity, financial, caloric, temporal, their effective cognitive function drops. Studies measuring this effect have put the number at something equivalent to a 13-point reduction in IQ. Not because poor people are less intelligent, because the constant background processing required to manage scarcity, the mental juggling of which bill gets paid, which call gets made, which corner gets cut, consumes working memory. Working memory is finite. Every dollar of attention spent on crisis management is a dollar not spent on strategy. This is not a footnote. This is the central mechanism of the trap. The thing that keeps people in the system is the same thing the system requires them to spend in order to stay in it. It is a rent you pay on your own mind. And like financial rent, it builds no equity. Every morning you wake up, you pay it again from zero. Now add to this what chronic stress does at the neurochemical level. Sustained cortisol elevation, the kind that comes from years of financial insecurity, social precarity, and zero margin for error, does not just feel bad. It structurally reshapes how the brain makes decisions. The prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for long-term planning, impulse control, and abstract reasoning, gets functionally downregulated under chronic stress. The limbic system, the ancient survival hardware, gets upregulated. You become, quite literally, a different decision maker than you would be under different conditions. You become someone who prioritizes the immediate over the important, who trades future value for present relief, who buys lottery tickets, not because they are irrational, but because when the prefrontal cortex is running on fumes, a lottery ticket is one of the only mechanisms available that offers even the psychological sensation of a long-term plan. And then, the market, which is infinitely sophisticated at finding and monetizing human vulnerability, steps in to offer relief. Cheap dopamine, instant gratification, the thing you can afford that makes the unbearable feel temporarily manageable. A bottle. A screen. A purchase you did not need, but could put on credit. None of this is weakness. All of it is biology. Understanding it is not an excuse. It is a prerequisite for defeating it. You cannot win a war you do not understand. The wealthy person and the struggling person can sit in the same movie theater watching the same film, same duration, same seats, same story. The wealthy person leaves having been entertained. The struggling person leaves having been temporarily relieved of a crushing weight that will be waiting outside the door. Same movie, different pharmacology, different brain, different decision-making apparatus for the rest of the day. The behavioral economist who looks at this and concludes that poor choices cause poverty has made the mistake of confusing the symptom for the cause. The cognitive degradation is not the failure. It is the output of the failure, which means fixing it requires changing the input.
So what does an actual escape trajectory look like for someone who understands the physics rather than the mythology? It begins with something that sounds almost medieval in its severity, but is actually the most neurologically rational first step available: a radical, temporary reduction in cognitive load. Not productivity hacks, not time blocking, not a morning routine with 17 steps. A genuine, deliberate subtraction of commitments, of social obligations, of consumption, of noise, to recover the raw material of strategic thinking. Working memory, prefrontal function, the capacity to sit with a problem long enough to actually solve it rather than patch it. The monk is not an aesthetic. The monk is a resource allocation strategy. Every great leap in any domain you can name was preceded by a period of radical simplification that looked, from the outside, like retreat or failure. Newton retreating from Cambridge during the plague and developing calculus in his mother's farmhouse. Darwin spending years after the Beagle voyage doing almost nothing visible while he assembled the architecture of his theory. Buffett, in the early days, managing a partnership from a room in Omaha with deliberate geographic and social distance from Wall Street, because Wall Street's noise was a tax on the clarity he needed to see what everyone else was missing. This is not romanticized asceticism. This is cognitive engineering. The reduction is not permanent. It is strategic. A temporary sacrifice of social comfort and consumptive pleasure to recover the one resource that cannot be purchased, borrowed, or outsourced: the ability to think clearly about your own future. Once that resource is partially recovered, and partial recovery is enough to begin, the next phase is not working harder in the field you are already in.
That is the era that the grind culture mythology perpetuates. Working harder in a single lane is linear. The world does not reward linear in a world of compound returns. What it rewards, quietly, without announcing itself because the reward only becomes visible at scale, is the deliberate combination of 2 or 3 skill sets that do not naturally coexist. A writer who understands statistics is not a better writer. They are a different category of professional entirely. A designer who understands behavioral psychology is not a better designer. They are operating in a different market, with different pricing, against a different and much smaller set of competitors. An engineer who can communicate to non-engineers is not a more technical engineer. They are an organizational asset with a completely different leverage coefficient. The combination is not additive. It is multiplicative.
And multiplication, in a world of compound returns, is the difference between a career and a dynasty. Scott Adams, creator of Dilbert, made this point with characteristic bluntness. He said he was not a great artist, he was not a great comedian, he was not a great business person, but he was pretty good at all 3. And at the intersection of those 3 pretty goods, there was a space that almost no one else occupied. The space was valuable not because he owned the top of any individual mountain,
but because he occupied a specific valley between mountains that most people never noticed was there. This is where the real moats are built. Not at the top of conventional hierarchies. Those positions are visible, contested, and therefore expensive to claim. In the intersections.
In the combinations that do not appear in any job description, that no university has yet created a program for, that no career counselor has ever recommended, because career counselors are optimized for legibility rather than advantage. There is a force operating against this kind of long-term, idiosyncratic strategy, and it is more powerful than most people give it credit for. It is social. Specifically, it is the social pressure exerted by people who are in the same economic and social position you are trying to leave. This force does not announce itself as hostility. It rarely presents as active sabotage. It is much subtler than that, and therefore much harder to defend against. It presents as comfort, as loyalty, as the reasonable expectation that a friend who gets a promotion buys the round. That someone who is doing well does not show off by changing too fast. That you remain legible to the people who have known you, which means remaining in the same category they know you as. The crab does not grab the escaping crab out of malice. The crab grabs out of instinct. The bucket is all it knows. The people in your current life, the people you grew up with, the people you drink with, the people who know the version of you from before you decided to change, are not your enemies. But they are, in a very specific and structural sense, a gravitational force. They pull toward the mean, toward the recognizable, toward the version of you they have already cataloged. And every deviation from that version, every new vocabulary word, every book you reference, every decision that prioritizes long-term logic over short-term social harmony registers as a mild betrayal. It is rarely articulated, it is almost never conscious, but it is real, and it has derailed more genuine transformations than almost any other single force. The answer is not to abandon these people. The answer is not to declare your friends unworthy and surround yourself with motivational posters. The answer is something far more elegant and far less emotionally costly. To build a parallel social environment composed of people who do not know the old version of you. Not in person. You probably do not have access to the physical rooms where those people gather, at least not yet. But in the medium that democratized access to minds entirely. Books, lectures, podcasts, recorded interviews, autobiographies. The people whose thinking shaped entire industries did not keep their frameworks secret. They published them. They lectured on them. They wrote them down in exquisite detail and then made them available for the price of a paperback or a library card. Charlie Munger spent a lifetime assembling what he called a latticework of mental models. Frameworks borrowed from physics, biology, psychology, economics, and history, woven together into a single, flexible instrument for analyzing reality. He did not invent this latticework in isolation. He built it from books, from dead men and women who left their best thinking behind for anyone willing to sit still long enough to receive it. The extraordinary irony of the modern world is that this inheritance, one of the most powerful cognitive toolkits ever assembled by our species, is sitting on library shelves and in digital archives, completely free and almost entirely ignored. Because it requires the one thing that the algorithm cannot package and sell: sustained, solitary attention. Your virtual mentors do not judge you. They do not pull you back toward the old version of yourself. They do not get uncomfortable when you change. They simply provide the upgraded mental models you need to make better decisions, and then they stay quiet while you apply them. There is one more structural element that separates the long game player from the short game player, and it is the one that ultimately makes all the others add up to something real rather than something merely interesting. It is the question of which side of the compound interest equation you are on. Most people are familiar with the concept. Money grows exponentially over time when interest is earned not just on the principal, but on the accumulated interest. $1 today is worth more than $1 tomorrow, not because of inflation, but because of time and trajectory. Einstein, apocryphally but correctly, called it the eighth wonder of the world. What people are less comfortable acknowledging is that this same mathematics applies to everything, not just money. Reputation compounds, skill compounds, knowledge compounds, network compounds.
Health compounds, or degrades, on a compound curve. Every day you are on one trajectory or another, and the gap between trajectories grows not linearly but exponentially with time. The person who reads one useful book per week and the person who watches 4 hours of algorithmically selected entertainment per night are not just making different choices, they are enrolling in different mathematics. The gap between them after 1 year is noticeable. After 5 years, it is dramatic. After 10 years, they are living in adjacent but structurally different realities. Same city, same external circumstances, different compounding curves. The critical distinction between assets and liabilities is not arcane financial knowledge. It is a framework for understanding what in your life is working for you versus what is working against you while you sleep. An asset generates returns over time without requiring your continuous physical presence.
A liability consumes resources over time, whether or not you are paying attention. This is true of financial instruments. It is equally true of skills, relationships, habits, and commitments. The person who understands this distinction truly, viscerally understands it, not just as an abstract concept, but as a lived lens through which they evaluate every decision, does not consume differently because they are more virtuous. They consume differently because they have internalized different mathematics. They understand that buying the depreciating car on credit to impress people who are themselves in debt is not a social transaction. It is an enrollment in a liability that will compound against them at an interest rate that does not care about their feelings. They understand that the hour spent learning a skill that will be useful in 5 years is not delayed gratification. It is an asset purchase. They understand that the relationship with someone who is thoughtful, principled, and growing is not just pleasant. It is a compounding investment. They understand that health is not a condition, but a trajectory, and that the trajectory compounds in both directions, and that the cost of reversing a negative health trajectory later dwarfs the cost of maintaining a positive one now. They think in these terms not because they are naturally more patient or more disciplined or more intelligent. They think in these terms because they have adopted a framework that makes these things visible. Before the framework, the trade-offs were invisible. After the framework, they are unavoidable. Now let us talk about what the world you are living in actually rewards, and why this moment, right now, in this environment, is one of the most structurally favorable moments in history to play the long game. The attention economy is the dominant economic force of our time. It is built on a single resource: human attention. Every major technology company on Earth is competing for fractions of that resource, which means they are all, every single one of them, structurally incentivized to fragment it, shorten it, and make sustained concentration feel uncomfortable and unfamiliar. This is not a conspiracy. It is a market. The market is optimizing for engagement, which is not the same as understanding. Engagement is emotional. Understanding is temporal. Engagement happens in seconds. Understanding takes hours, days, years. The market that optimizes for engagement will, by its own logic, systematically destroy the capacity for understanding. The consequence of this is something you can observe in almost every professional domain. Sustained attention has become a form of competitive scarcity. Not because humans became less capable of sustained attention, but because the sustained practice of it has become rare enough that those who retain it carry a structural advantage in every field that rewards deep work, long cycle thinking, and genuine expertise, which is every field.
that matters. A researcher who can sit with a problem for 3 uninterrupted months in an environment of algorithmic noise is not just working differently from her peers. She is producing a qualitatively different output. A product designer who can hold the entirety of a user's experience in mind long enough to detect its systemic failures is not just a better designer. He is operating in a different cognitive register than a designer who thinks in sprints and presents in decks. A writer who can sustain a single argument across 100 pages without losing the thread is not just more prolific. She is building something that cannot be assembled by someone who has lost the capacity for that duration.
This is your advantage. Not because you are naturally more patient than the person scrolling, but because you understand the physics. And the physics says that the scarcest resource in the attention economy is the ability to resist the attention economy. Every person who develops that ability in this environment is operating with a structural tailwind that compounds over time. You do not need to be smarter. You do not need to be luckier. You do not need to be born into a different family or a different postcode. You need to enroll in a different mathematics. And you need to start that enrollment before everyone else realizes what it offers. Because once they do, the advantage normalizes, and you are back to competing on conventional terms. The final thing to understand, the thing that ties all of this together into a single coherent strategy, is that long-game thinking is not patience. Patience implies suffering through the present in hope of a better future. Long-game thinking is something categorically different. It is the recognition that the present and the future are not in opposition. They are the same trajectory, seen from different vantage points. Every decision you make today is a bet on what your life will look like in 5, 10, 20 years. You are always already placing those bets. The only question is whether you are placing them consciously, with the full weight of compound mathematics behind them, or unconsciously, by default, into whatever the algorithm suggests. The cage that holds most people in the short game is not made of iron. It is made of assumption. The assumption that long-term thinking is a luxury, available only to people who are already secure. That you need to get your immediate situation stable before you can afford to think about the future. That survival and strategy are sequential rather than simultaneous. This assumption is understandable. It is also wrong. Survival and strategy are not sequential. They are parallel tracks. And the decision to defer strategy until survival is guaranteed is itself a strategy, one that has an extremely poor historical record. The person who waits for perfect conditions to begin investing in compound trajectories waits forever. Conditions are never perfect. The margin is never quite wide enough. The risk is never quite low enough. There is always one more crisis to navigate before the long game can begin. And so the long game never begins. And the mathematics of compounding, which does not care about your readiness, which does not pause for your circumstances, which runs the same equations on everyone regardless of their intentions, works against them with the same indifference it would have worked for them had they started. The cage is open. It has always been open. The lock is made of urgency, manufactured, amplified, and continuously refreshed by every system that profits from your inability to think beyond the next quarter. The systems that profit from your short-term thinking are very good at what they do. They have billion-dollar research budgets, Nobel-winning behavioral scientists, and decades of optimization behind them. They are not evil. They are efficient. And their efficiency is aimed with extraordinary precision at the one variable they need to control to keep you profitable: the length of your time horizon. Extend your time horizon and you become unprofitable to these systems. You stop being a consumer and start being a builder. You stop reacting and start positioning. You stop playing the game that was designed for you and start playing the game you designed for yourself.
This is not a romantic notion. It is a strategic one. It is the recognition that the most powerful competitive advantage available to any individual in the modern world is also the simplest to describe and the hardest to execute. Thinking 1 year further ahead than everyone else in the room. 1 year, not a decade, not a generation. 1 year of time horizon, applied consistently, in a world where the median attention span is measured in seconds, and the median planning horizon is measured in pay cycles. 1 year of genuine, compound-aware, physics-informed long-term thinking is not a marginal improvement on the conventional approach. It is a different game. And different games have different winners. You already know which game you want to play. The question is whether you are willing to accept the social discomfort, the short-term invisibility, and the temporary sacrifice of immediate reward that the long game requires. Not because these are noble virtues to be endured, but because they are the price of escape velocity. And escape velocity, once achieved, is the price of everything else. The rocket is fueled. The trajectory is calculated. The physics is on your side, if you commit to the speed. The only variable left is you.